So, hi, folks who are here live, as well as the people who are watching this after it's been recorded. We're here with Howie Hawkins, who is the Green Party's candidate for governor, and it actually running as a write-in candidate this time, which is an interesting. I'm going to use the word odyssey. The long journey to how we ended up getting here, and I thought maybe we could start off with kind of how we got to this spot, because a lot of folks don't know, even myself who knows, but because this has been such a drawn out over years kind of process, you kind of get a little bit lost on the overall arc and how we got to the point where there's really only two parties in New York State. Even with the other two so-called independents, they just run Republicans and Democrats. So how I was wondering if you had a chance, if you could kind of just explain how we got here to this spot where there's really no real third independent parties.
Well, I think it started in 2014.
Yeah.
I was debating Cuomo out there in Buffalo, and he just shut down the Moreland Commission into public corruption. And when it started looking at his office, he shut it down. And he'd been saying it's an independent commission. Then he said, it's my commission. I called him a hypocrite. I don't think he liked that. And then in that election, Brian Jones and I got 5% of the vote. Cuomo been saying he wanted to get more than his father Mario ever got, more than he got when he was elected in 2010. He got less. He didn't like that. So I think he began thinking then that how do I get rid of this Green Party? And he had his chance during the COVID lockdown, although it had been in the news, there was a secret plan to eliminate third parties. That's the title of a New York Times article in November 2019. And this was when a commission was set up by the legislature to implement the public campaign financing system. And along with that, they said, well, we want to get rid of smaller independent parties because we can't afford to publicly finance them. The problem with that argument was the system doesn't finance parties. It finances candidates that qualify. So yeah, you knock out the statewide candidates, and you don't have to pay public campaign financing for them, but they didn't change the numbers for down ballot for state assembly and state senate. And I'll talk about this later. Green should be getting that public financing the next election cycle. It's not that hard to get, and it's pretty generous. So that was just BS. What they really want to do is eliminate the competition. And the media narrative is Cuomo's always whining about the Working Families Party making demands on him, but they always cross-endorse him in the end. They've never taken any votes from Cuomo. We took 184,000 votes. Well, that's how many we got in 2014. Cuomo saw them as we took them from him. So I think that's, how we got to the situation. So when everybody's locked down and the legislature is meeting virtually over Zoom, like we're talking right now, he attached a ballot access reform or a ballot access exclusion bill to the must-pass state budget. And what that did was doubled the frequency a party has to qualify from every 4 years for governor was the old standard. Now it's every 2 years, president and governor. It more than tripled the number of votes you need to maintain a ballot line. The law says 2% or 130,000. 2% is always going to be a lot more than 130,000. In 2020, it was 173,000. And we didn't meet that standard, so we lost our ballot line. That's a very high standard. The only times we've met it is when I got 184,000 in 2014, and when Ralph Nader got 240,000 in 2000. And the people that wrote that law were surely aware of that. So that's one thing they changed. So then if you lose your ballot line, you got to do a petition. It used to be 15,000 signatures in 42 days. Now it's 45,000 signatures in 42 days. So they tripled the total signatures. And then there's a distribution requirement. Used to be you had to get 100 signatures in half the congressional districts. They quintupled that to 500 signatures in half the congressional districts. So they made all these changes that basically we got the hardest comparable petition in the nation and in fact the world. And we do have, it's on our campaign website, a draft bill to go back to the old standard for statewide offices of 15,000 signatures in 42 days. And we brought it to state legislators and their staffs. And I joke, hey, we just want to go back to the Putin standard because the next most difficult petition we can find is if you want to run as an independent for the state Duma, which is their national parliament, from one of their 85 regions that they elect them from, which are like our states. It's 15,000 signatures in 45 days, 3 days easier than our petition. So I say, let's go back to the Putin standard, and the legislators and the staff chuckle, maybe nervously, and they say, you're right. But so far, they haven't been willing to introduce the legislation because I think they don't want Hochul and Jay Jacobs, the some Democratic state chair, on their back. So that's how we got to where we are. Basically, the Democrats passed a law that made it more than 3 times harder to get on the ballot and stay on the ballot in New York, harder than any other state in the country. So we only have Democratic and Republican candidates on the ballot for governor and lieutenant governor, as well as attorney general and comptroller. And this is the first time since 1946. And it was the only time since 1891, when they started printing secret ballots, the state did, that there have only been Democrats and Republicans on the ballot. So we're in a very unique situation, unprecedented. And so we're left with a corporate neoliberal, Kathy Hochul, in the sort of in the center, and a far-right extremist, the Republican Lee Zeldin, which leaves a huge vacuum on the progressive left in New York politics. But we don't have a voice, at least on the ballot. So what the Green Party offers, we know from public opinion polling, majority support: single-payer universal health care, a Green New Deal for aggressive climate action, universal public child care, tuition-free public college, affordable housing through measures like good cause eviction, rent control, and social housing. And this was in a Zogby poll, as we were trying to petition these 45,000 signatures last spring, 60% of New Yorkers say, yeah, it should be easier for third parties to get on the ballot. So the majority is with us, but we're really, we're not on the ballot, we're not in the public debate. And just to go over some of the issues that the public says are top of mind for them, Emerson College had a recent poll, 38% said it's the economy, jobs, inflation, the economy, but neither major party candidate has a program really dealing with the economy. They're debating the cultural, social issues. 14% said abortion was a top issue, and 83% of the people in the state said they support abortion rights. Now, Hochul is making that a big campaign issue, even though abortion rights are politically secure in New York. Next highest first issue, top issue for people was healthcare. But it's only the Green Party that's got a plan to deal with that. Our support for the New York Health Act, which is very popular, just polling on that shows that. 9% said gun violence, with 79% supporting New York's new gun control laws. So again, Hochul's campaigning on an issue that is really not controversial in New York. So she's not offering people anything new. 7% said it's crime. This is where Zeldin is trying to appeal to people's fears by wanting to roll back some of the criminal justice reforms that have been made in recent years, like bail reform or cash bail reform. And 5% said immigration. And Zeldin is hitting on that, campaigning on anti-immigrant xenophobia and scapegoating. So Hochul's campaigning on abortion rights and gun control, which are secure in New York, and Zeldin's campaigning on fear of crime and immigration. Now, what we're trying to do in the Green Party is campaign on, particularly on 2 of those top 3 issues, economic justice and healthcare. But we're not in the media narrative. In fact, the media narrative isn't really about the issues. It's about the horse race. So the latest Siena poll has Hochul up 17%. The latest Marist poll has her up 10%. I mean, she should be landsliding Zeldin by more than that, because he's just not in touch with the majority of New Yorkers on, one of his issues, gun control, healthcare. I mean, not healthcare, abortion. And if the economy is an issue, tell me what Zeldin's economic plan is. He doesn't have one. This whole campaign is negative. And meanwhile, not only do these people not speak to the issues that concern the people of New York, they're crooks. I mean, Zeldin was running around calling, and still is, he's an election denier. He backs up Trump's big lie about the Democrats fraud, stealing the election for Biden. He voted against election certification in Congress. And then he tried to get a petition like we did for an independent line, in this case, the Independence line. He didn't get enough signatures. So somebody, and he signed off on all the cover sheets, photocopied over 11,000 signatures and sprinkled them through the petition and tried to get away with it. That's election fraud. This guy is an insufferable hypocrite and fraudster, and he's one of the only two candidates on the ballot. And the DA in Albany says they're investigating. I mean, we do know from news reporting that this was done in Republican headquarters in Albany. So I don't know how long they need to investigate to find out who made the photocopies and who put them in there, and if Zeldin knew what was going on. But you know, they've had months to do it, and there's still no indictments. So don't hold your breath on that. And then meanwhile, Hochul, I mean, we know Andrew Cuomo. I ran against him. I called him out in that debate on TV. But Hochul's pay-to-play corruption is even more brazen than Cuomo's ever was. She's giving out subsidies and tax breaks and contracts and legislative favors worth hundreds of millions or billions of dollars to campaign donors who are giving her hundreds of thousands of dollars. There's $1 billion for the Buffalo Bills billionaire owner of that for a new stadium, which just so happens to benefit her husband's stadium concessions and gambling businesses around the stadium. And then there's another $1 billion for a developer in New York City for a plan that will replace thousands of residences, businesses, small businesses, and jobs with 10 high-rise office buildings. You know, New York has too much office space. It's a stupid deal. But this guy has given her hundreds of thousands of dollars. He also happens to be a guy who's given hundreds of thousands of dollars to the Republican attempt to take back the House. So at the fat cat level, they're bipartisan, they're promiscuous. No matter who wins, they've already bought the politician. She gave a $637 million contract for COVID tests to a donor who gave her $300,000. And the cost of those tests was 45% higher than they got them in California because they did competitive bidding. She just gave the contract to this donor. And then there's another $5 billion contract for a couple up here in Syracuse for Medicaid transportation services. And this couple has given $150,000 to Hochul, as well as $236,000 to Cuomo. Before that, of course, Cuomo's the person who appointed Hochul lieutenant governor. There's a crypto mining moratorium bill sitting on her desk for months. The legislature passed it, but she won't sign it. Maybe that's because crypto mining interests are pouring money into her campaign coffers. Same thing with, single payer healthcare. Big health insurance companies are, filling her coffers, and she's, not saying anything about or for New York Health Act for single payer. So here we are, Gloria and I, my running mate, Gloria Mattera, for lieutenant governor. We're running against a couple of crooks on a popular platform that isn't being covered in the media. So, what can we do at this point? We got about 3 weeks left in the campaign. One thing is I'd urge everybody to write a letter to the editor. Pick an issue. Whatever your issue is, single payer healthcare, affordable housing, the Green New Deal. Ballot access is a popular issue, and editorial writers or page editors kind of like that issue anyway. Give people a reason to vote green. Make it simple. Just pick your issue. If you need a model, there are a couple of letters from Fred Balzac, who's up in the North Country. Got him in a couple papers, and he focused on the ballot access question. So you might look there. Our website is hawkinsmattera.org.
I have a link in the chat, so it's already
good.
up there. Yep.
We have palm cards now at the printer, and an order for 5,000 of them, which show you on a palm card how to do a write-in ballot. So we're not sure how many we should actually print. So if you want a substantial number for your local Green Party group or wherever you are, please let me know in the next few days so we can up that order if we need to. And then we're going to have a phone and text banking operation going. We'll have the script soon, and people will have an opportunity to sign up for that. And then we want to get at least the enrolled Greens, who are disappearing now that we're losing our ballot line in all likelihood, but we still have the old list. Get them to write us in and at least make a statement that people want more than what they're being offered, and they like what the Greens are offering them.
Well, and Howie, if you do get 150,000 or so votes across the state, that probably gets us ballot status back again, right?
It would 150,000 write-ins.
Yeah,
it's a tall order, but you don't know if we can do it until we do the write-in and see what happens. So
right.
we'll do the best we can. So and then I'll talk a little bit about after the election. I know people can get discouraged with what may be happening at the national level with the Republicans taking back the House, maybe the Senate, and just their anti-democratic authoritarian politics. They may be disappointed that the Democrats couldn't get simple things passed like federal voting rights standards to preempt the suppression of voters that the Republicans are enacting in states they control. The climate crisis continues. Economic situation is hard for a lot of people. We may be going into a recession, so it's easy to get a little discouraged. But I think we need to remember there's a huge political vacuum on the left that the Green Party can fill. So we need to keep speaking up, being visible, running local candidates. And I think sooner or later, there's going to be a breakthrough. We don't know when it's going to come. We didn't know Occupy was going to explode in October 2011. We didn't know that there would be the biggest, demonstrations in American history in response to the murder of George Floyd and the Black Lives Matter uprising in 2020. So we don't know when it's going to happen, but we need to keep plugging away, speaking out, running candidates, so we're ready when there is a break for an independent, progressive political movement. And then as we go into the next cycle, I think people need to, get an early start. In upstate, we'll have local elections in most communities, 2023. And then the state legislature will be up sooner than we know it in 2024. And the thing is, they didn't change the petitioning requirements for state assembly or state senate. They're still 1,500 for state assembly, 3,000 for state senate. That's not impossible. It's not easy, but you have a half-serious campaign, you can get those signatures. The other thing that happens is on November 9th, the public campaign funding cycle for the next 2 years starts. It'll be the first cycle under this law that passed in 2020. And also the qualifying for the matching funds. I mean, listen at this. It's not that hard. For assembly, it's $6,000 in qualified contributions of $250 or less. And if you're in a low-income district, it's $4,000. Now you need at least 75 qualifying contributions of $250 or less. For the Senate, it's $12,000 or $8,000 in a low-income district, and it's 150 qualifying contributions of $250 or less. And the match is pretty significant. Out of the, up to $250. For the first $50, it's a 12-to-1 match. 12-to-1. You give $10, the candidate gets 120. It's an 8-to-1 match for the next $100 and 6-to-1 match for the last $100. So we should have Green candidates running for the state assembly and state senate, getting into that matching fund system and having hundreds of thousands of dollars to run a real competitive campaign in 2024. I mean, that is right there before us, and we don't even have to get the ballot access law changed. But I do think, and this is the last thing I'll say, and then we can go to questions. I think we can win a fair ballot access law in the next session of the state legislature. I believe we can find legislators who will introduce it. They were reluctant before the election, but afterwards, I think we can get them to do it. And when we get that introduced, then we can all, make it a public issue, lobby our state assembly members and senators. And this is the issue I think the Green Party should lead on, the whole pro-democracy issue. And I think we can win fair ballot access. Did I disappear or? Oh, there I am. I hit something on my computer and lost the screen. We can win on a fair ballot access, and I think we need to follow that up with pushing for ranked choice voting for statewide offices and proportional representation in the state legislature through multi-seat ranked choice voting. I think these are issues the Green can take the lead, and it's about voting rights, and that includes not just the right to vote, but the right to vote for who you want, and that's what the RCV, the ranked choice voting and the proportional representation, will do. So I think we have lots of opportunities ahead of us. The situation is there's a huge vacuum for us politically. And even though at the state level ballot access is very hard, we still have plenty of ways to make ourselves heard and make a difference.
Well, thanks, Howie. I'll say this. I'm willing, and with the two county co-chairs here on the call, but I'll be the person to say, I would say at least just a round number of 500 palm cards. I'll commit us to getting those out if we can get our hands on them.
Okay.
Or I'll do it. If anyone wants to help, that's fine. That's right. A couple Saturdays at the market or some door to door. That's easy.
Yeah, and I think when you talk to people, it's not just fly-by leafleting. It's use the card to stop and have a conversation and point out what's on the ballot and talk about why we're not on the ballot and say what's important. So it's not a piece of paper somebody takes, puts in their pocket and never reads or thinks about.
Yeah, strategically, and I know this isn't necessarily the goal of the call tonight, but because a write-in campaign is automatically dismissed a lot of times, and without that conversation, it's really not worthwhile to be doing that work if you're not going to explain why it's so important. Not only the issues, but getting ballot status back and having more say at the state level. So without question.
I find most voters are surprised that the Green Party's not on the ballot. And when they find out why, they're outraged.
Yeah.
And that may motivate some to say, F the two major party candidates, I'm voting for the Greens this time, even if it's a write-in.
Yeah. I know I can probably, just because I know everybody on the call. So it's things you're probably going to ask, but I'd like to do, because I remember when the New York Health Act first started getting talked about, before it was even like a bill yet. And it was just about, they're trying to get legislators to sign on to have it become an official bill. And the whole thing, the Republicans had the Senate then. And the whole thing was, if we just get this, Democrats get the Senate, this bill will fly right through. And I don't know how many sessions, I've lost count of how many sessions of the legislature have gone by with this bill just sitting in committee. So I was wondering if you could kind of speak to that a little bit, because we have the bill, we have people signing on all the time, and yet it's just sitting there.
Yeah, the bill, or an earlier version of it, first passed the Assembly in 1992. It passed many times since. And the Assembly Democrats said, well, give us majority in the Senate and then we'll get it passed. So they got it in 2018. In 2020, they got a supermajority in the Senate as well as the Assembly. They got the governorship. What's holding them up is that the insurance companies and the drug companies are filling the Democrats' coffers with lots of campaign money. So you're right, it hasn't got out of committee since the Democrats took control of the Senate in New York. And we've had the same thing happen in Hawaii, California, and Vermont. As soon as the Democrats get control of the government, with veto-proof control, suddenly they can't find a single payer can't go forward. So, yeah, that's why we need the Green Party. We're not running because we're hoping to get campaign and drug company donations.
Well, I can keep doing this, but we don't have to listen to my voice. Does anybody have quite issue-based questions or even tactical-based questions or anything like that Howie or someone else could answer? Linda, I was waiting. I wasn't going to bring it up. I just figured you were going to. So yeah, go for it.
That's okay, Dave. And I guess you're probably expecting I'm going to lead with a climate change question, but I'm actually going to lead with an abortion rights question. So I was listening to Howie, talk about how both, gun laws and abortion rights are presently pretty secure in New York, and how Hochul is kind of running on something that's secure, not doing anything risky. I tend to really disagree with you there in terms of whether or not abortion should be something that we're still really going for. And that's because, well, partly because Lee Zeldin is so awful, and doesn't believe in abortion rights for rape or incest or to save the mother's life. So he's awfully right wing in that respect. And so that kind of does make it an issue for us and for her, and something easy to win. And then also it's very important for women as well. And I guess so Kathy's chasing the female vote, but it's more than abortion rights. Okay, so they are pretty secure in New York state at the moment because of the Reproductive Act, but there are these centers called crisis pregnancy centers. They're fake reproductive clinics. They currently outnumber in New York State 3 real clinics or 3 Planned Parenthoods to 3 fake clinics to 1 real Planned Parenthood clinic. So abortion is not accessible in New York in general. You can't, for example, get an abortion in Geneva, but you can go to a fake pregnancy clinic and thereby be talked out of having an abortion, and instead going on to have a baby that you may not be able to raise. And so I don't think that Hochul's pushing the abortion access in the way that she should be at the moment in terms of CPCs, but it's not as secure as many people feel that it is at this present time. Yeah.
Yeah, well, the New York Health Act would make abortion, one of the medically necessary services that the public healthcare system covers, which would enable, a woman in Geneva who gets, defrauded by one of these fake pregnancy clinics, she wouldn't have to go there. She could go to, a medical doctor, not just an abortion specialist, and get referred to people that do provide those reproductive services. So that's something we can do to improve healthcare access. We can also get a constitutional amendment, which Hochul does support, and that's, I think, going to in the process of moving forward. I think the real danger is after 2024, if the Republicans have the Congress and the president, I mean, they're ready to pass a federal ban on abortion, like this is Poland or, Nicaragua or one of these really anti-abortion countries. And that's, I think, where the danger is. So it's not a state issue, at least, people running for Congress. It's an issue in a lot of those races. I know in my district, it certainly is. The Republican is strongly anti-abortion, but I'm just thinking, I don't think he gives a crap about the issue himself, and he might not be so hardline once he gets in Congress. He's a total opportunist. He's a businessman, and he's saying what the Trump Republicans want because that's what they want to hear. I'm not sure he believes it himself, but, if that's how you get elected, it's probably how you're going to govern because you want to get reelected. So yeah, I don't disagree that abortion is an issue we need to work on and, fight to protect. Just in New York, I mean, we're in a lot better situation than a lot of states.
Should we, because Linda, you did bring it up, should we go to some climate stuff? Is that okay? All right.
Go for it.
So Howie, I'm gonna set up this softball for you, but also I think this is necessary and needs to be said for the how manyth time in terms of, I'm going to use the term the Green New Deal. Because I just saw another reference to that term connected to Democrats. And so I thought maybe you could quickly do the history of that terminology because you're one of the relative originators of that, and then go into what your trying to do with the campaign in terms of climate change?
Okay, well, the Green New Deal, I actually wrote a draft of the platform plank for the Green Party USA back in 2000, when the Green Party was split and there were two conventions, and we're in a worse situation than we are now. And the other delegates didn't want to say Green New Deal because New Deal was a Roosevelt Democrat thing. So we ended up calling it, I forget what we called it. But anyway, the content was there, but not the label. And then in 2008, in the Great Recession, some British Greens, including Caroline Lucas, who's a member of parliament, put forward basically a recovery program that made big investments in the transition to renewable energy, part of the program of recovery. It also had social and economic reforms, like regulating or taking over the big banks. So when I got nominated to run for governor in 2010 in New York, I took it to my running mate, Gloria Mattera, and said, we should call what we're running on a Green New Deal. And she said, oh, that's too Democrat. That's the Roosevelt people. And I said, well, the British Greens ran on it. In fact, the European Greens, that's what they called the theme for their Euro Parliament elections in 2009. And so she yielded, and some other people resisted, yielded. And so we became the theme of our campaign. And so we were the first candidates in the United States to campaign on the theme of a Green New Deal. And it became the signature issue of the Green Party over the next decade. Jill Stein ran for president in 2012 and 2016 on the theme of a Green New Deal for America. And we were running on it here. Candidates across the country were. In fact, by the end of the 2010 campaign, we had something like 75 Green candidates around the country sign off on a Green New Deal statement that was federally oriented. So then in 2018, some Democrats decided they were going to use a slogan. The Sunrise Movement and Alexandria Ocasio-Cortez, who had just got elected, and they went to Speaker Pelosi's office and sat in demanding a Green New Deal. And it was kind of a friendly sit-in. I mean, they didn't really sit in and stay. They made their point. It was a demonstration. And then AOC, when what AOC was, and actually Sunrise were pushing for, was a select committee on a Green New Deal that could put legislation directly to the floor of the House. And Pelosi wasn't having any of that. She wanted her tried and true fossil fueled, Democrats in charge of energy and commerce and environment and public works and the relevant committees. So she said, we're going to go through the, proper order of the committees. So what AOC and Markey then did, Senator Markey from Massachusetts, is write a non-binding Green New Deal resolution, a sense of the House. But, it really watered down what the Greens were talking about. We wanted to ban all fracking and new fossil fuel infrastructure. That wasn't in there, a non-binding Green New Deal. The same with the phase out of nuclear power, the deep cuts in military spending to help pay for the Green New Deal. And the goal of 10 years, at that time, 2030, they extended 20 years to 2050. And then they changed the goal from real zero carbon emissions to net zero carbon emissions, which opens the door to burning fossil fuels and supposedly capturing it and sequestering it. And of course, most of the sequestering going on, because there are about a dozen of these facilities attached to biofuel and fossil fuel refineries, most of it is pumped into fracked oil wells to push more oil out of the ground, which doesn't sequester carbon. It gets more carbon burning going. So, it was quite disappointing. But then Pelosi, she never brought it to the floor. She sent it to a dozen different committees to review, which will kill any bill. There are a dozen ways to stop it, and it's never moved out of any of those committees. And the Senate version went to the Environment and Public Works and never moved. And they reintroduced it the next session and hasn't moved. So the Green Party nationally just passed a platform plank for an eco-socialist Green New Deal to distinguish from what the Democrats are doing with their climate policies, which is running them through the private sector, through the same corporations that got us into this mess. The energy giants, the utilities, the manufacturers, the automakers. And they provide tax breaks, incentives, subsidies, loan guarantees, corporate welfare, basically, and then rely on the individual bottom line decisions of hundreds of corporations to somehow add up to a coherent, coordinated plan to get us to a renewable energy system, which is not going to happen. It's going to create bottlenecks like this, I call it Build Back Badly, the Inflation Reduction Act, which is a real defeat for the climate movement, but Sunrise and these people are saying, oh, it's a big victory. I mean, I guess they got to tell their funders they're getting something done. You know, that bill, I got off on a tangent, forgot where I was taking this, but, you know, that bill has all these incentives, but what's not in there, for example, is long distance transmission lines, which you need to get solar and wind energy from rural areas to urban markets. So there are all kind of supply chain problems that will happen. And then there's the problem that why would a steel company, for example, just mothball its coke ovens and transition to electric arc furnaces and green hydrogen furnaces before they've used up their coke ovens? Not if they're looking out for their bottom line. So we're saying a lot of this has to be done through the public sector, particularly the power, transportation, and manufacturing industries, in order to be able to publicly plan and coordinate a complex transition. And I think that needs to be our main critique of the Democrats' climate actions. Aside from the amount of money they're spending is just totally insufficient and just too late to meet the kind of climate goals we need to do if we're going to stay below 1.5 degrees Celsius increase in global heating, which, you know, we're getting all these studies. They're scary as hell. Like last year, the International Energy Agency, which is a not UN but multi-government agency set up during the energy crises in the 70s, and it's been a conservative organization. It's promoting nuclear and fossil fuels. More recently, renewables. They did a study and said we cannot build any new fossil fuel infrastructure to have a 50% chance of reaching that 1.5 degree goal. And then this year, there's a peer-reviewed study that said it's worse than that. We have to keep 40% of the fuel in the wells and mines that already exist in the ground to have a 50% chance of reaching that 1.5 degrees Celsius goal. So bringing that back to New York passed a law that's, you know, much weaker than the law the Greens helped write, the New York off fossil fuels bill. It's a compromise between the Working Families Party and Andrew Cuomo called the Climate Leadership and Community Protection Act. And it calls for a bunch of things. I mean, just to show you that these people really weren't serious, it says right in the prefatory language that our goal is to limit the amount of carbon in the atmosphere to 400 parts per million. I mean, that was the goal 20 years ago. Anybody here at 350.org? You know, and this bill passed 10 years after Bill McKibben started popularizing that standard that our climate scientist James Hansen had proposed. So, you know, despite all its problems, it passed in 2019. We're now about to enter 2030. There's been no funding for it. The planning for it is behind schedule. There's just no urgency at the state level. And so we need a Green New Deal for New York, you know, the kind of plan that, you know, the Greens have been talking about in this state since 2010.
All right, I'll open it if anybody has a follow-up on environmental stuff. If not, then by all means, let's throw it open for something else that we're trying to get done at the state level.
Kathy Hochul, just in the last week or two, didn't she pass a law that said it would be that no fossil fuel cars could be produced in New York State after 2035, that we must be totally have gone over to electric by then. And I wondered, why 2035? Why not 2030. It's
'Cause-
ridiculous. It's not taking it seriously. We need to have fossil fuel cars off the road a long time before 2035.
Well, I think the answer is General Motors set that as their goal. That's when they're going to stop producing internal combustion engine cars. So then Massachusetts and then California and now New York are saying, okay, it's an easy thing to do because there won't be many, gas guzzlers produced after 2035. Now, the Green Party in that New York off bill, I think we said 2024. This was in 2018. So within 6 years. And of course, that's not what's happening. We're always ahead of the curve. We're not in power. But, if you look at what's required, the biggest contribution to greenhouse gases nationally is the transportation sector. And it's particularly internal combustion engine vehicles. So it's a key sector that has to be transformed. And to wait until 2035 is just playing with fire because, the heating already built into the climate system. It's hard to estimate precisely, but, we're already seeing the consequences of that with, the melting ice, the melting tundra, which releases methane and carbon, the storms with more energy. We're having 1,000-year floods every year. It's getting pretty scary.
Would anybody have, whether it's something on that as a follow-up or something, a totally different one? I do, but I could do this all night. So I just want to make sure I'm not hogging up all the questions. Okay, well, I'll do one again. Maybe it'll elicit somebody to have a thing they'd like to bring up. Howie, I'd like to, whether it's the Green Party in New York State in general or yours and Gloria's campaigns, I'd like to talk about poverty. That we're trying, at least locally, we have been for years, the Greens here have been trying to instill that idea that the generational poverty continues to not just have a bunch of poor people in our city, but also explains crime and all these other effects, bad health care outcomes, things like that. So what, either the campaign or the party in general, what plans do we have? What are we advocating for in terms of eradicating poverty?
Well, I think the first thing is a guaranteed minimum income above poverty. The guaranteed income that Martin Luther King Jr. said in his last book, Chaos or Community, Where Do We Go From Here? That he thinks the best approach to eradicating poverty is the most direct approach. Poor people don't have enough money. So, put money in their pockets, make it part of the income tax structure. If you're below the poverty level, you would get a check every month to bring you back up above. So that is a direct solution. It's a fast solution. Now, what Hochul recently said is that they're going to have a commission to study poverty, how to reduce child poverty in half in 10 years. Why 10 years? Why half? It's, why are we rationing out justice when we already have, direct solutions? So, I've tried to make that an issue in our press releases, and we may come back to it again. The only thing worse than, or only situation of poverty worse than Rochester, which is second in the nation in child poverty among cities over 100,000, and third in the nation in family poverty among those cities, is Syracuse. We're first in both child poverty and family poverty. And then over in Buffalo, they're sixth in child poverty and family poverty. And the poverty in the small cities, the old, factory-based cities across the upstate tier are hurting too. And it's not an issue for Hochul or Zeldin or the media. The media is based in New York City, which is not, they have poverty for sure, but it's not as bad as it is in upstate New York. I think it's just a terrible neglect. So I think we need more discussion of it. And then we have other programs like, housing. We support just cause eviction, the application of rent control, which is now permitted somewhat by state law, but also we need to expand affordable housing and do it directly through the public sector, public housing or social housing, independently of the feds. So they've capped the amount of public housing units we can have in this country, thanks to Andrew Cuomo and Bill Clinton. When Andrew Cuomo was the head of HUD, they got the Faircloth Amendment passed, which put a cap on public housing. It's less than 1% of the housing in this country. In European countries, it's 15, 20, 25, 30% of the housing. And when it's that big a sector and it's open to people of all incomes and people pay rent scaled to their income, which cross subsidizes low income people, it also desegregates them on the basis of class, which in this country also means race, because the public housing we did build was, designed to concentrate Black people primarily, but other poor people in the worst parts of cities in, high-rise concentrated poverty, apartment buildings. We need public housing that it should be a clean energy program. It should be powered by renewable energy, built with materials that sequester carbon and are, clean in terms of the emissions of toxics. It should be a jobs program because it's a whole building program, economic stimulus program, a desegregation program. And that would, because housing is a huge issue of affordability. Last time the state comptroller looked at it, and it was a few years ago, and it's probably worse now after COVID and the, skyrocketing rents we're seeing now. At that point, a quarter of New Yorkers paid more than a third of their half of New Yorkers paid more than a third of their, or 30% of their income for housing through rent or mortgage. The federal standard of affordability is 30% of your income. And that's an increase because it used to be 25%. I forget when it changed, but I think it might have been during Reagan or Carter. But, and then a quarter of people were paying more than half their income just to put a roof over their heads. So it's a huge crisis. It's getting worse. Homelessness is up, not because more people are crazy or drug addicted, but because, particularly single moms with some kids can't afford an apartment. That I think is something we need to do to deal with poverty. And then we just put out a release about how, public goods and services are the best way to deal with inflation, but also just, general prosperity. It's more cost effective to provide education, healthcare, much of housing, childcare through the public sector than through the private sector, where some people who don't have the money don't get covered because they can't pay for it. And so it's a way of rationing it so the poor people don't get covered. Same thing with broadband. Rural New York and some urban neighborhoods have second-rate broadband if they have it at all. Because, like in my city, Syracuse, Verizon told the mayor, "Oh, we'll build out, just give us permission to, put in, what do you call it, the lines, the high-speed lines." And so Verizon came in and they did it in the university neighborhood and the, upper middle class professional neighborhoods. And then they said, "We're done." And the mayor hadn't even signed a contract with them, so they could do that. They're actually coming back through now because, there's business, I guess, money to be made now. But, 10 years ago, they just said, we're done. And that's, what a private company can do as opposed to, a public broadband system that would make sure everybody had high quality service at its real cost, not cost plus a giant profit, which these telecoms are making. So there are a lot of things we can do to make life easier for everybody, not just the very poor who can't, afford rent or food or utilities, but also for the, the working class people that are struggling, and every, month they may be running out of money at the end of the month, or who are just losing a paycheck away from a real crisis. And so it should be a huge issue, and it's not even being discussed by the two major candidates or the major media. And it's a shame.
Well, I can connect something else, and if I remember right, I think you did like briefly mention it, like at the very beginning of our discussion. And this would, if done correctly, have an effect on poverty, but other things just in terms of the economy, and that's public banking statewide. So I know here in Rochester it was discussed, probably the last time Greens were able to run locally, um, and somebody who was elected, who's not a Green. Had like one meeting about it, like a public meeting during the pandemic. It was on Zoom, and then there's just been silence. So I was wondering if you could speak to a state bank that would help small businesses and as well as individuals as well.
Yeah, and invest in the transition to clean energy.
Yeah.
Yeah, a public bank means public priorities can be invested in. And if there are loans with interest, that money comes back into the public treasury that can be used for public needs. And it would provide a yardstick in terms of if it did mortgage lending, in terms of doing it without discrimination, without redlining. What it could do would be a yardstick for what the private sector banks should or could do. And it's such an important function, that is, credit, that it shouldn't be in the hands of these predatory creditors based in Wall Street. You may not think you're dealing with them, but they have their fingers in all kinds of predatory lending, from credit cards to payday loans. It's they're just sucking us dry. A public bank could show that you can do it a lot more effectively, targeting our priorities, and at less cost than the private banking sector does. So there's just so much to say for it, and we could use it at the state level, and any municipality or county could do it as well, so they can focus on their immediate, local needs.
Yeah, wouldn't it take not only the will to do it, but wouldn't there need to be some change in state legislation for that? Or is that already set? I can't remember.
Well, I think if you wanted to set up a state bank, you probably have to pass a bill to, have it chartered, and,
Okay.
How it would be governed, and, what its authorities were or were not. You probably want to do the same thing at the municipal or county level as well.
Well, and speaking of something that's public and municipalities, I mean, there already is to some degree, public utilities as well, would also deal with other environmental issues, poverty, stuff like that. So expanding what the government does in terms of utilities for folks also would be beneficial too.
Yeah, there's actually a bill, didn't get anywhere in the last session. I think it's called the Energy Democracy Bill, but it would basically set up a process for all our IOUs, investor-owned utilities, to be converted to part of a statewide public energy system. Build around NYPA and the 50, or I guess it's 49 existing municipal power companies, who, partly because they have privileged access to the hydro that the New York Power Authority produces, provide electricity at much lower rates than the investor-owned utilities. I mean, my utility is National Grid, although most people call it National Greed. It's the other thing is, what it does, whether it invests in, for example, they want to create hydrogen and pump it through the gas lines to blend with the gas for building heating, which, if it's blue hydrogen, where the hydrogen is stripped from natural gas, it emits carbon dioxide then, and you'll have methane leaking along the way. They're trying to keep the combustion heating model in place instead of the electrification model of, geothermal and air heat pumps that, act as both air conditioners and heating just depending on the time of year, and you just turn the direction of where the heat goes and where the cool goes. And that is much more energy efficient and zero carbon. If the electricity source is zero carbon, but we're moving towards that. So now National Grid's plan is to keep going with natural gas and then start blending in hydrogen made from natural gas and maybe eventually green hydrogen made from the electrolysis of water that is clean, but it's a waste of that green hydrogen, which is relatively expensive and energy intensive because the hydrogen is energy storage. It's not original energy. So you lose energy in the conversion electrolysis to hydrogen. And then when it recombines with CO2 in the air to create energy for driving vehicles or heating, like in a steel furnace or any other industrial process, that's what we need the green hydrogen for. If we're burning it in our homes, it's taking away from where we do need the green hydrogen. So anyway, that's what National Grid has in plan. And with a public energy system that's under our control, where we elect local energy boards that then federate at the state level, we have a direct say, rather than what we got now, which is a public service commission appointed by the politicians who are funded by the utilities, who then quote unquote regulate the private utilities and generally do so in the interest of the private utilities, not the public or the environment. So yeah, there's a lot of reasons to go public power. That's a natural monopoly. That's the classic example of where public enterprise should be used. And instead we go with this private model with regulation, where the regulated capture the regulators and run the system in their own interests.
All right. Is there any, and you can put it in the chat if you're not interested in like unmuting, that's totally fine too. But I'll be honest with you. We also don't need to go, I mean, usually Green Party does stuff for hours. We don't need to go like 2 hours, which might be actually more beneficial because more people will watch something that's not super long. But I don't want to like cut anybody off. So does anybody have any other questions or even just comments, at least before I stop recording? Okay. Well, Howie, can you just like, again, kind of reiterate, so for the next 3 weeks, if people want to help, what are the things that they can do?
One, write a letter to the editor, and do this quick because the letters on elections are piling up. I know my Post Standard here in Syracuse said October 31st, which is a week before November 8th, but I doubt a letter that late will get published. So, get it, the sooner the better, the more chance you have it will get published. Palm cards, you're gonna get 500 in Rochester.
Sweet.
Anybody else who sees this video, please go to hawkinsmattera.org and indicate through the volunteer or contact tabs that you want palm cards. And then keep your antenna up for notification about phone and text banking to the enrolled Greens, our lists in the state, so we can tell them how to do write-in votes. I think that's what's we most need in the next 3 weeks.
And as always, there's the immediacy of social media. So when this video gets posted, or if you were to share the website, hawkinsmattera.org, on your social media, not just if you manage, I'll just use Facebook as an example, not just if you just manage a page, but even just your personal profiles, so that people who know you personally can see that you're supporting this, and it just makes it easier for other people who have been wanting to support people who are running for office who agree with the things that they do, and it almost like gives them permission to not have to align with a corporate party. So sharing that in your own personal social media is also very beneficial as well.
Yeah, I should have mentioned that. Thanks for bringing that up.
So, all right, cool. So I'm going to go ahead and stop recording. And if anybody then wants to like take your gloves off and really just let whomever have it, that's totally cool. And it'll be off the record. But I'll just mention for folks who are watching the video, hawkinsmattera.org, and at least on our social media, both my personal and the Green Party of Monroe Counties, we'll put links to website. You can go and check all that stuff out. And if you do live in Monroe County, hopefully you'll get your hands on one of those at least 500 palm cards. So thanks for, we don't have to finish, but as recording the video goes, thanks for everybody who's came by tonight and asking questions and enjoying the conversation. And please go ahead and share this where and when you can, as soon as you can.